being recorded on November 30, 2023. We have just been kind of doing office hours live streams the past few weeks. We do these at twitch.tv/socialism S4A, where currently I'm joined by about 50 viewers in the chat. We do these live, and like I said, for the last few weeks, we've just been doing office hours streams where I show up, people show up with their questions and topics of discussion. Sometimes I do a little bit of a monologue or just whatever's on my mind. Today, I actually don't have that much on my mind, but I wound up clipping a bunch of stories. So we're actually going to do this as a numbered live stream rather than just a totally free-form office hours. The only real difference being that I clipped more articles than I do for the office hour streams. But yeah, there's actually kind of a lot of things not really piling up, because I feel like they're all pretty recent, but just a lot of stuff happened that I felt like was worth clipping and kind of discussing that way rather than just totally free form. So anyway, I think I've beaten that to death. Again, twitch.tv/socialism S4A is where we do these things. That's 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. UTC. And we do these pretty much every Thursday, sometimes Wednesdays if there's a conflict on the Thursday. But yeah, it's Thursday today, and we are rolling. Before we get into anything else, I want to thank the patrons. The many patrons of the month of November 2023 are up on the screen. These are people supporting at patreon.com/socialismforall and buymeacoffee.com/socialismforall. If you're looking to make a one-time donation, buymeacoffee.com is probably the better bet. You can just drop in some money there. Or you can actually also become a recurring member on buymeacoffee.com. You can also do technically either on Patreon, because it'll bill you when you sign up. So you could just, sign up, get billed, and then cancel. But Patreon is kind of really more for the recurring membership. They don't have, they kind of frown on people signing up and doing a one-time thing. Anyway, but thank you very much to the financial contributors. This is a non-commercial channel. We don't run ads. We don't do sponsorships. It's just viewer supported. So really want to thank people for that, because I would make content even if nobody supported, but I wouldn't be able to spend this much time on it. We're coming up now on 4 full years of doing this channel. I started this as a Facebook page. Technically, I think I made the page over 4 years ago in maybe August 2019. We started posting on it, I think, in January 2020, started the YouTube channel in February 2020. And let me tell you, I was just wanting to do some more reading, and I had a few things to rant about back then. And it was like, let's really study some Marx and Lenin and all that kind of stuff. Here we are, almost 4 full years later, and this thing has really, really grown. And it's great to see that there is kind of a study community that has formed around the channel. We've gone through different phases, before I knew enough to make more of my own independent judgment about what's going on with China, for example. There have been different phases of the channel as people have been part of the community and then maybe have left for one reason or another. But there's also a lot of people that have kind of stuck through on this learning journey. I feel like this past year has been the best by far. The videos, in my opinion, are higher quality. I know a lot more what I'm talking about. We didn't do live streams at all for the first 2 years, specifically because I was just trying to get to a point where, actually we had covered the foundations and the basics. And now we're able to get into more of the controversial and interesting topics, starting to catch up with, the last 50 years of the international communist movement. And we will continue to do that as we go into year 4. But names in blue have been supporting for over 3 years, names in green over 2 years, names in yellow over 1. So you can see there's a lot of long-term support. That warms my heart every time I see it. And I'm just appreciative that you all have been with us on this journey here. I'm the facilitator, and again, this came out of originally my desire to do the reading, but a lot of other people apparently were interested in doing the same kind of thing, because we got to 2020 and we're facing another once-in-a-lifetime financial crisis is around the corner on the order of 2008, building up to that in the biggest, well, it's really a bigger bubble than 2008 even adjusted for inflation, as we were just discussing in the chat. And we're going to cover in a minute what just happened in New Zealand with a far-right government getting formed. And I think some of the reasons for that are somewhat alarming for the Democratic Party, who seem to be sleepwalking into this election with Joe Biden doing not really anything for most people, not even really discussing major problems facing the country, like the housing crisis, the paralysis of the housing market, the across-the-board cost of living crisis. Anyway, a lot of you have been there pretty much since the beginning, and again, happy to share this journey with you, and we're going to go on into the future. So thanks again to the patrons and buymeacoffee.com supporters for helping to keep this channel non-commercial and, just a study group, public-facing study group community. Really appreciate that. All right, so let's get back there. And so what do we have? So like I said, sometimes I do a bit of a monologue in the beginning. We're going to cover some current events, though, and read through some articles along the way. Now, the first thing that doesn't really require a whole article is Henry Kissinger finally died. Although somebody was saying in the chat, I honestly think it'd be like one of the funniest. I mean, it'd be not something I'd be happy to see, but on some level, it would be one of the funniest pranks of all time if Kissinger came back a week later and was like, "Just kidding," because he knows everybody is just waiting for him to kick the bucket, or hopefully he actually did go and he's not coming back. So he was aware, not is aware of how many people were just happy to see him go. But just a reminder, these people are flesh and blood. They live and they die. They breathe oxygen just like we do. And they're not immortal. They're not gods. They are just some scumfucks that, got on top of the ruling order of society. But there was another significant death, also at a very advanced age. Kissinger was 100. But there's also Charlie Munger. Let me get the visual for you here, who was 99 years old. And you might not know this name, but he was Warren Buffett's right-hand man. He was the vice chair of Berkshire Hathaway, and his net worth was, I think, $2.63 billion, if I recall correctly. So as far as Kissinger, and, people know Kissinger for his many political misdeeds as a, scummy imperialist operative working with Nixon and all kinds of people. Hillary Clinton famously proud of Kissinger's tutelage, but had a hand in Angola, Argentina, Bangladesh, Bolivia, Cambodia, Chile, Cyprus, East Timor, Jamaica, Laos, South Africa, Vietnam. Then there's all the other various dictatorships around the globe that he and the administrations he served under supported. But people like this, the billionaires, these are the people that the Kissingers work for. There would be no Kissingers without the capitalists like this who need them to run the state and to manage imperialism and do all the fucked up things that imperialism requires, all the coups, all the covert actions, all the wars, all of the genocides, all of the things. It's people like this that the Kissingers work for, though you may never have heard this guy's name. But yeah, anyway, he died, as somebody said, it's like an advent calendar. He died like the day before, I think. So just wanted to put him a little bit more on the radar for people. And we'll come back around to the political stuff in a minute. First, I just want to do some health stuff. As we were just posting on the community post, youtube.com/@socialism4all, and then the community tab under there, the COVID is not looking great this week. So this is a screenshot from BioBot, found online at biobot.io, biobot.io/data, if you want to go right to this page. You can see here at top the overall COVID-19 or SARS coronavirus 2 wastewater levels. Turns out you can track the amount of virus that is circulating in the population, even if people aren't getting tested. by just directly monitoring what comes out of our bodies into the wastewater. So as you can see, actually in that top, the two shades of blue chart, that's the whole pandemic. And you can see that the dark blue line, which is the wastewater average, national wastewater average, underneath that, there's more of like a teal or lighter blue, maybe slightly green line. So the slightly green area under the curve there, that's the testing level. And as you can see, in early 2022, about halfway through the pandemic now, it died off because the tests were no longer free. You couldn't just get a PCR test for free. And if you want to get a PCR test, which are much, much more accurate and reliable than the rapid tests, which sometimes the rapid tests won't even give you a positive until day 4 or day 5 with some of the strains. Like a rapid test is better than nothing, but a lot of times it gives people false negatives. It'll tell you you don't have COVID if you actually do. So not as reliable. The PCR much, much more accurate. And as you can see, that just died away while the amount of COVID that was actually circulating and being detected coming out of people's bodies has stayed high. Now, currently this year has followed the pattern roughly of 2021, where we did have a big winter spike, then a lull, although this year's lull was not as deep or tranquil a lull as there was in 2021. Then as you get into the fall, there's another spike, then a dip, then it goes back up again. Now, it remains to be seen if we're going to have another massive Omicron type spike, if like a new super variant emerges. But nevertheless, this is, while last year was a more consistent spread overall, and a lot of people got COVID multiple times, which is not a good thing to do because it wreaks havoc on your body. It's been a lower year than last year, but still a significant year, more than 2020 and definitely on par with 2021. Time will tell what next year looks like. But as of right now, you can see down at the bottom, breaking down the wastewater monitoring into different geographical regions. Well, what's that purple line? That is the Midwest, and it is surging right now. It's at about 850. After you get over 700, I count that as just a full-on surge. So they're squarely up in the Midwest in surge territory and just climbing rapidly. The Northeast right behind. The West is also starting to surge. Southeast holding level at a moderate level of COVID right now. But keep an eye on this because, it's the last day of November today. And then we got December, January, February, typically really bad months for COVID. And, what are the risks here? We covered this actually in the last video. And I got a really weird string of comments from somebody as we were talking about the risks of reinfection. And as you can clearly see on this chart, each time you get reinfected with COVID, it varies a little bit in terms of which risk we're talking about. But there's not necessarily a linear increase in risk between the sort of the more you get infected, the higher your odds are of developing one of these issues. And basically it goes up every time you get reinfected. There was somebody trying to contest this, and I was like, clearly, they were saying it was the same risk every time you got reinfected, except that's not exactly what the chart shows. But anyway, it's amazing the things that people try to misconstrue that are just right in front of their face. It's not safe to get COVID. It's not safe to keep getting COVID. And your risks do, you're rolling the dice every time with reinfections of developing some kind of potentially crippling organ damage. Don't do it. This includes neurological and brain damage resulting in cognitive impairment. You just don't want to go there. So in N95 we trust. And then in case of a respirator N95 failure, you want to stay up to date on your vaccines as well. But so related to this, you may have seen news about there's mystery pneumonia that is going around China, and I was trying to get to the bottom of what's going on with this. So according to the WHO, World Health Organization, there's this big surge in pneumonia, especially in kids in China, and it does not seem to be so far like a new strain of microbe that is causing the pneumonia, but just common stuff in combination that is causing a wave of pneumonia. Like there's definitely an outbreak. Actually, if we switch to China is getting a lot of coverage right now about this, but it's also Ohio in the United States. This is a state in the Midwest in the U.S. This is the first state to report an uptick in pediatric pneumonia amid surging cases in China. So the Warren County Health District has reported 142 cases of the illness among children since August, according to a press release. And then if we zoom in, there's a different article also about Ohio. It says the county's health department said on Wednesday, quote, "Not only is this above the county average, it also meets the Ohio Department of Health definition of an outbreak." It also says several European countries are battling similar crises as fears of outbreaks of the infection rise. So the CDC says that, quote, "nothing is out of the ordinary." CDC has dropped the ball so many times on COVID deliberately. It's just incredible. But anyway, they say that there is an, quote, "ongoing investigation underway in Ohio into what is triggering the wave of illness. The average age of patients is 8 years old, but some are as young as 3. So again, they don't think that it's a new or novel respiratory disease, but rather a large uptick in the number of pneumonia cases normally seen at one time. Let's do one more thing from the UK and then maybe speculate a little bit on what's going on here. So China pneumonia warning issued as the UK is told to prepare for, quote, worst case scenario. So it says the world could be venturing into the unknown after the outbreak of a new mystery illness in China, a health expert has warned. So now we saw the other article where the WHO is saying it seems to actually just be common germs causing this pneumonia and not a new, novel strain, some new disease popping up. However, this story is from just an hour ago. Literally, I was just getting these before the stream. So it's literally about from 2 hours ago. And so, whether this is a novel thing or not, so far the stories are leaning towards that it isn't. Let me just point out that COVID-19, although we didn't really see it in the U.S. until March, and that's when the emergency was declared, it's called COVID-19 because it started in 2019, exactly like this 4 years ago. So we'll see. But let's say for a minute that it is just common respiratory illnesses that seem to be causing a much bigger than usual wave in China, in parts of the U.S., and so on. Why would that be? Well, we know that COVID attacks and reduces the effectiveness of the immune system. So your T cells are one of the pillars of your immune system. B cells and T cells are kind of like the major pillars of your immune system. T cells are things that can go out and attack things like cancer cells, or they can attack pathogens like viruses and things like that. So you really need this part of your immune system. Unfortunately, there are 2 viruses which directly attack, infect, and kill T cells. There's also another kind of virus that can turn T cells cancerous. But as far as just straight up attacking and killing T cells, 2 viruses can do that: HIV and SARS coronavirus 2. SARS-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, can attack and kill T cells. So what you see in a lot of people, and there's a lot of very technical, dense medical threads if you go on to medical Twitter. Trying to think of, what is the guy? T. Ryan Gregory has done some stuff. I'm blanking on the other guy's name that did T-Cell Week in the style of Shark Week. I almost covered that when we were doing a lot of COVID coverage in the streams and just standalone videos. I almost covered the T-Cell Week thread that guy had posted on Twitter. In the end, I decided it was a little too technical. I was stopping every 2 seconds to do a 5-minute explanation of the medical terms that he was using there. Anyway, bottom line, we know that getting infected with SARS-2, getting COVID can really wear down your immune system. People see dramatically reduced immune function and lowered T cell counts after some cases of COVID. So is this a case of, in China, this was the first year that China really reduced its protocols for stopping the spread of COVID. They were one of the strictest countries prior to that, good for them, in keeping this thing under control and not just letting it rip. Well, now they have gone to more of that scenario, although more people still mask in China than you're likely to see in the US and things like that. So there is still some common sense there. But a lot more kids got COVID than would have gotten it before. Is this a consequence of that? I don't know yet, but I think that that's a reasonable hypothesis at this point to be tested. Is this the result? Kind of like last year, there was this big education campaign around RSV, an illness, respiratory illness that normally is not that big of an issue, but was causing some really severe consequences and breakouts last year. Well, again, why is that? Is it COVID-induced immune suppression? Probably. So, the right wing pushes this line that, the shutdown. Yeah, the half-assed 3-month shutdown that the United States did, really caused all these kids to not have their immune system get challenged. It's a bunch of horseshit. The much more likely thing is that SARS-2 infects and kills T cells, and it strains the immune system. It basically tires out the immune system. So, is that what's happening here? And so more kids are succumbing to a more common illness. I think it's possible, but we really don't have enough details yet. Keeping an eye on this story, though, because, again, in 2021, this was around the time that Omicron emerged. And, 4 years ago, this is the time that SARS-2 emerged in the first place. Is it something new? Was seeing people posting about, quote, new COVID on Twitter. Didn't have time to go into it before we started streaming today. But I just don't know what it's going to take at this point. We have been taking COVID very seriously here in the channel, reporting on it a lot, reminding people to wear an N95 or a P100 or whatever and stay up to date on the vaccines. But again, even if you're fully vaccinated and you get infected, your odds are not zero of getting long COVID. And most long COVID cases start out as mild cases. By the way, if you have a, quote, mild case of COVID up front in the first few weeks, just means you didn't have a severe immune reaction to it off the bat. It does not mean that the virus is not actively attacking your brain, your heart, your kidneys, and so on. So you really want to avoid that, because this virus is capable of broad spectrum damage, basically any kind of tissue that has ACE2 receptors, basically all of your major organs, your brain stem, the thing that controls your heartbeat and so on. It can infect and damage all of these different kinds of cells, and you don't need that. Damages the pancreas. That's another thing we know in children, is that a SARS-2 infection makes children more likely to develop both type 1 and type 2 diabetes. So real pancreas damage going on there. This can just result in all kinds of problems down the line. So don't get COVID, wear an N95 or better, and then stay up to date on your vaccines in case you have a respirator failure. Straps break, or sometimes, you might get it through your eye if somebody coughs right in your eye, and so on. So, all right, little bit of an update there on BioBot, and just making note of this, quote, Chinese pneumonia going on. Is it just a case of COVID-induced immune dysfunction? Possibly. Is it something else? WHO says, there's not evidence of that yet. Time will tell. Time will tell as this thing probably spreads and we get more information. All right, so speaking of, let's go next into the New Zealand elections. So this is a courtesy of a viewer from New Zealand who is very concerned about the right-wing government that is forming in New Zealand. And there's a COVID tie-in, as you'll see. So this is a CNN article, New Zealand shifts right as voters punish the ruling party. So this is from a month and a half ago, October 14. So reading the article, New Zealand Prime Minister Chris Hipkins has conceded his Labour Party lost Saturday's elections as voters punished the government and took the country rightward 9 months after his predecessor Jacinda Ardern suddenly resigned. By the way, I missed that news when Ardern resigned. Little quick side note on that. Here's from a different article about that. New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern announced Thursday she will stand aside for a new leader within weeks, saying she doesn't believe she has the energy to seek re-election in the October polls. Speaking at a news conference, Ardern said her term would end by February 7, when she expects a new Labour Prime Minister will be sworn in, though, depending on the process, it could be earlier. Quote, "The decision was my own," Ardern said. "Leading a country is the most privileged job anyone could have, but also the most challenging. You cannot and should not do the job unless you have a full tank, plus a bit in reserve for those unplanned and unexpected challenges. I no longer have enough in the tank to do the job justice." So, stepping down, and then the right wing stepped in to fill the vacuum. So, what happened? And again, I think that this ties into, you will definitely hear echoes of what's going on in the U.S. economy. I also just posted a thing about the German housing market is crashing. So as we've discussed in the last few live streams, there is a 2008 style crisis coming that, even adjusted for inflation, looks like it's going to be bigger than 2008, scheduled to hit in the next year or two. So the pattern that the U.S. and the U.K. have seen in their housing market is, let me just actually put it on the screen, and we'll come back to this article. Put it on the screen briefly just while I'm talking about it. You can see it hit a peak in 2022, then started to decline. Then there was a brief rally again. By the way, this is a lagging indicator, so that is not up to date fully. Prices have started dropping again. But there was this 2023 rally. In the US and the UK basically showed the same pattern in house prices. Germany, though, just peaked and did not have the rally and has been coming down in the sharpest decline that they've seen in decades. The problem is, and it's being caused by high interest rates, just like in the US. Problem is, currently, the prices are still too high for the interest rates to be workable. So in other words, if you buy a house now, the mortgage is going to cost you so much with the interest that you would need the price to be lower than it is just to offset the high cost of the interest. So they're in this kind of waiting game for the prices to keep dropping until the base price is low enough that taking on a mortgage at the current interest rate is doable. So in the meantime, the rental market is going through the roof as people are getting away from buying and into renting, and making it just a landlord's market and driving the rents through the roof. So major pain going on in Germany right now. And again, in the US and the UK, total lack, well, at least in the US, I'm pretty sure it's the same in Canada and the UK, paralysis of the market due to very low inventory, very low houses for sale, and so on. And basically, this has not returned to pre-pandemic levels as other economic indicators have. And when it does, there is likely to be massive economic crisis, because this is kind of the last linchpin holding things together. And when it goes, watch out. All right, so getting back, though, to the New Zealand article, again, I think there's some parallels here. So the rising cost of living dominated the election campaign, with voters in New Zealand ending 6 years of Labour Party rule, the latter half of which was dominated by the country's strict response to the coronavirus pandemic that successfully kept infections low but battered the economy. Well, I don't think that mass amounts of people dying and becoming disabled would be really good for the economy. And again, it's like I said before with the U.S., over 1 million people have died. Has there been any real mourning? Does Joe Biden even mention this? No. It's just the economy, the economy, the economy. It's just feeding people into the meat grinder of the economy, the economy, the economy, the same economy that is about to pop, and just the shit will hit the fan in a way that it's going to be massive. But meanwhile, it's just this cult-like, disturbing need to believe in, quote, normalcy, the back to normal, back to normal. It's a kind of denial of reality and of the dimensions of the situation that we are in. I think a lot of people are just not real capable of dealing with the reality right now. That is something that we try to facilitate discussion of here at this channel. and I know that the people who do stick with us are ones who are ready for that. But I mean, we've got to really get out there, and this bubble is going to pop one way or another. Trying to get people ready for it so that they don't get taken lying down by it is at least something. But I don't know. All right, continuing. With more than 98% of votes counted, the center-right National Party, led by former airline executive Christopher Luxon, had amassed around 40% of ballots, according to New Zealand's Electoral Commission. A dejected Hipkins, that was the progressive guy, told supporters that Labour did not have enough votes to form a government. Quote, "The result tonight is not one that any of us wanted," he said, according to RNZ. Quote, "I gave it my all to turn the tide of history, but alas, it was not enough." Luxon said that New Zealanders had, quote, "voted for change." No, so like conservatism is literally the opposite of change. It's keeping things the way that they are or used to be. Anyway, continuing. I'm trying to unpack this. Like, let's just throw the whole suitcase away. And that his party would now get to work trying to form a coalition. That will be our next story, because they did form a coalition with loathsome far-right parties. That's the government that they have formed, but coming up in a minute. Quote, "Tonight you have given us the mandate," right-wingers love this, "to take New Zealand forward." Yeah, because conservatives are all about, the future. "Coalitions are the norm under New Zealand's mixed member proportional system, which was introduced in 1996. The nationalist New Zealand First Party and its leader Winston Peters could potentially become kingmaker in a coalition administration along the libertarian right-wing ACT Party," and I believe that's exactly what happened. "The only party to win a majority of votes and govern alone in the current political system was Labour in 2020, when Ardern won a landslide second term, buoyed by her success at handling the country's coronavirus outbreak. But Ardern announced her shock resignation in January, saying she no longer had enough fuel in the tank to contest an election, and passed the reins of her party on to Hipkins. A progressive global icon, Ardern's time in power was defined by multiple crises, including the Christchurch terrorist attack, a deadly volcanic explosion, and a global pandemic. Overseas, she became famous for being a leader unafraid to show empathy and compassion at a time when right-wing populist demagogues were coming to the fore in many other, some of the language that, Western democracies is a bit of a stretch, but anyway, yeah. We know what they're talking about, the overall global far-right convergence. But back home, her popularity ebbed amid a rising cost of living, housing shortages, and economic anxiety, and she faced violent anti-lockdown protests in the capital, Wellington, with threats made against her. So this is like blow for blow, very similar to what's gone on with MAGA in the U.S. Ardern's successor as Prime Minister, Chris Hipkins, inherited these issues, which have since been compounded by a sluggish economy, an historically high inflation rate of 6%, and an accounts deficit that has concerned ratings agencies. So before we go to the next screen, the inflation has been a major issue in the U.S. So it's one of the Federal Reserve's mandates to keep inflation low. The target figure is 2%, and they try to do that without causing undue, really high unemployment. But in capitalism, you don't have the right to a job, just like you don't have the right to housing. And the way that capitalism works is they have to keep a certain amount of people unemployed. So right now, it's been like 3.8, 3.9%. That is not doing it. So they need closer to like a 5% unemployment rate. And they think that that is just the way that the system needs to work. And everyone, sort of says, oh, how regrettable. But, it's what capitalism needs to keep prices stable and blah, blah, blah. Well, so the price of the economy in capitalism is millions of people, millions of workers being unable to work and being kept in unemployment deliberately by Federal Reserve policy as just the way that they manage imperialism. Unlike how the libertarians say, oh, just end the Fed, everything will be fine. No, it would actually be less stable if you ended the Fed. There would be kind of more panics, crises, and even less stability. I know that's hard to imagine, but that is exactly what you would have, as the built-in boom-bust cycle of capitalism would not really have the systemic controls where they at least try to mediate it. But capitalism gets more unstable with time, and it trends towards a final crisis from which it cannot recover. That doesn't end capitalism, it just makes life really, really shitty. Only socialist revolution can end capitalism. No matter how bad things get, that still takes an active effort. And what happens in the meantime is capitalism becomes more fascistic, more brutal. So anyway, that's what we're in. We saw an uptick in that after 2008 and so on. So this inflation, you may have been hearing about that in the US. Well, they were giving out loans at very low interest rates with very permissive lending policies for a long time. Now lending criteria have been tightened up. The interest rates have been jacked way up. So a lot of businesses about to go out of business. People will be laid off. I think I was looking at something, it estimated about 19 million workers currently are employed by companies that are either like junk bond rating or sort of moderate grade, but not really stable. So there's like chances of up to like 20 million workers being thrown out of work as these tightened lending standards come into place and businesses are no longer able to finance themselves, basically. A lot of corporate debt coming to maturity next year, twice as much as did this year. And at the new inflation rates, a lot of them will not be able to do what's needed, either pay off their debt or refinance, and they will go under. And that will throw lots of people out of work. That will also throw a lot of housing onto the market as people are unable to pay their mortgages and either do forced selling or they default. So yeah, a lot like 2008, 2009, you might say. Yeah, except probably even more dramatic. So as far as the Democrats and Biden coming into next year's election, what are they doing about any of this? It's like they're trying to pretend none of these issues even exist. They're trying to call it Bidenomics as if this is somehow a win. And we'll look at in a minute the kind of crumbs that they're throwing at this problem. It's just not going to work. And one wonders, if they stand the slightest chance in the capitalist elections coming up. Anyway, so this is the first election in New Zealand following the end of strict coronavirus lockdown measures that have been a source of contention for many. And of course, those flames have been fanned by the capitalist media, always trying to sow discord and discontent. The government's go hard and go early approach to the pandemic saw New Zealand impose some of the world's strictest border rules. Of course, New Zealand being an island, it's easier to do that. Saw New Zealand impose some of the world's strictest border rules, separating families and shutting out almost all foreigners for almost 2 years. It meant that New Zealand suffered far fewer COVID infections and deaths compared to many countries like the US or UK, but many residents felt that the government went too hard on its measures. Yeah. Anyway, so as they say, they were damned if they did and damned if they didn't, because, it's either the human toll or the economy, and, you're going to be making somebody unhappy no matter what you do. So anyway, the big issue, Saturday's election took place the same day that Australian voters struck down the first attempt at constitutional change in 24 years that would have recognized First Nations people in the nation's founding document. Can I just say, fuck every settler Australian that participated in that, because honestly, I know Australia started out as like a penal colony and so on. It just doesn't give you the right to victimize other people, Anyway, all the main New Zealand parties pledged to improve the economy. I mean, do any parties ever come to power and be like, we will destroy the economy? Anyway, so they all pledged to improve the economy, provide relief for the cost of living crisis, boost jobs, improve health and education facilities, as well as housing. Central to National's 100-day plan is its promise for myriad tax cuts, including cutting a regional fuel tax. It is also pledging to change the Reserve Bank's mandate to focus on inflation, remove red tape for businesses, other conservative claptrap. Labor's policies include extending free dental care to under 30s, easing rising food prices by removing the goods and services tax from fruit and vegetables. I don't know what that goes to fund, but anyway, and so on. So it's amazing to me how people still lack the political maturity in sufficient. I mean, there are people who have the political maturity to understand some of the negative consequences of these things, while others, there's still a surprising amount of people who lack the political maturity to kind of understand the consequences here. And of course, we have to look beyond capitalism. In the meantime, is this what you want? So Hipkins, 44, was first elected to Parliament in 2008, spearheaded the country's COVID-19 policies in 2020. Before becoming Prime Minister, he was Minister of Education, Police, Public Service, and Leader of the House, and so on. So now let's get to a bit more of a critical analysis and breakdown here. This is from World Socialist website, and this is a Trotskyist website. I don't recommend it generally, at least on issues sort of pertaining to the international communist movement. That said, they do some fairly accurate, sort of general reporting on the state of things in the capitalist world. So this is Far-Right Government Formed in New Zealand by Tom Peters, and this is more recent from 5 days ago, November 25. After 40 days of secret negotiations following New Zealand's October 14 election, the Conservative National Party leader, Christopher Luxon, yesterday signed a coalition deal to form a government with two widely despised far-right parties, ACT and New Zealand First. That's exactly what was being hinted at in the first article as a possibility. The agreement brings to power the country's most right-wing government in decades. Its task will be to make drastic cuts to public services and ramp up the exploitation of the working class while significantly increasing spending on the military to prepare the country to join imperialist wars. Notwithstanding Luxon's mantra that he has built a, quote, strong and stable government, the protracted negotiation period indicates that the three-way coalition will be profoundly unstable. The three parties failed to reach an agreement in time for Luxon to join world leaders at the APEC, Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit, in mid-November, which is a major international forum. The absence of a government for nearly 6 weeks, during which mass protests erupted, opposing the U.S.-backed genocide by Israel against the people of Gaza, will have caused concern among New Zealand allies in Washington and Canberra. New Zealand is a minor imperialist power in the Pacific region and a member of the U.S.-led Five Eyes intelligence sharing network. We covered some of that in an older video about the, AUKUS, Australia, U.S., U.K. effort to build up, was like the U.S. was giving nuclear submarines to Australia as part of a Pacific fleet against China in a possible future World War III. Successive governments have joined U.S.-led wars against Iraq and Afghanistan, and the political establishment is supporting the U.S.-NATO war against Russia over Ukraine and the militarization of the Indo-Pacific region against China. None of the three parties has any significant popular support. The National Party only got 38% of the votes, while ACT or ACT received 8.6% and NZ First just 6%. Taking account of roughly 1 million eligible adults, 1/4 who didn't vote for anyone, national support falls to 28% of the actual population. Responsibility for the right-wing victory rests with the outgoing Labour Party, which received 26.9% of the votes, a dramatic collapse from 50% in its 2020 election victory. After 6 years in government, in coalition with the Greens, and during 2017 to 2020, NZ First, Labour's claims that it would alleviate the housing crisis and end child poverty were completely discredited. Under Labour, living standards collapsed amid soaring costs for food and housing. Does that sound familiar in the U.S.? Yes. About 600,000 people, 11.5% of the population, relies on food parcels to survive. More than 100,000 people, 1 in 50, are homeless or severely housing deprived. Do we have a major housing crisis in the U.S.? Check. Meanwhile, tens of billions of dollars were found to provide subsidies and bailouts for big business during the pandemic. Check. Anybody remember the Paycheck Protection Program? The Labour government's support plummeted after it ended, although let me just say, nothing at all compares to the UK's Eat Out to Help Out campaign. They were literally telling people in 2020, just as they were lifting the shutdown for the summer, that like you have to go eat at local restaurants to like save the economy. That is one of the funniest things, like funny but also sad things ever. But Eat Out to Help Out to me is just one of the most unintentionally funny things ever. All right. The Labour government support plummeted after it ended New Zealand's effective COVID-19 elimination strategy in late 2021. And it's kind of like the U.S., although the U.S. did it even earlier, which is also when Joe Biden's popularity went way down. and allowed the coronavirus to infect millions of people. Since then, so before we get into since then, because remember, who votes Democrat? It is disproportionately people of color and poorer people of color and poor people generally. But yeah, there is a significant component of race there. Who is also disproportionately affected by COVID? You guessed it, people of color and poorer people generally. So while a lot of the white poorer people have been co-opted into being extremely reactionary and part of the racist kind of white nationalist faction that is growing, in general, people were not real happy there in the Democratic base about this policy turn because they knew that, well, they wanted masks as a mandate and they wanted more COVID protections. And that was exactly what Biden was. Literally, Biden just got up at Christmas and was like, many of you will die. Yeah, that's not like, are you trying to win this thing or what are you doing? Anyway, since then, more than 3,500 people have been killed by COVID and 34,000 hospitalized in what is an ongoing public health disaster. The new national-led government will intensify the attacks on the working class, with the two extreme right parties wielding disproportionate power. Indeed. Newsroom journalist Mark Dalder posted on Twitter that based on the coalition deals, quote, it's not hard to get a sense that this is ACT and New Zealand First's government. National is just running it. So anyway, they go into a few more of the details. This is kind of a longer article. Let me just skip ahead and see some of the details. So Peters, whose party has a long record of racist agitation against immigrants, especially Muslims and Chinese people, has also been made foreign minister. New Zealand First's Shane Jones will be Minister of Regional Development, and the party's Casey Costello will be in charge of customs. Labour and the Greens hypocritically denounced New Zealand First as racist, despite the fact that in 2017, then Labour leader Jacinda Ardern formed a coalition with NZ First and made Peters both Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister. The deal was supported by the Greens, which joined the Ardern government. New Zealand First chose to form a government with Labour rather than National in 2017 because at that time, Labour was viewed in Washington as the preferred party to strengthen military and intelligence ties and to integrate New Zealand into the build-up to war against China. Both National and Labour committed to increasing military spending from 1.4 to 2% of GDP. Labour's Defence Minister Andrew Little stated in August that this was necessary in case New Zealand is, quote, called on to join a war against China. So that's the first half of the article. I'm not going to read the whole thing just in the interest of time, but getting a foot in the door on what's going on there and possible shades of what's coming up for next year's elections in the U.S. Now, when it's a presidential election year, people in the U.S. tend to pay way more attention than in off years or even in midterms years. But what is the conversation going to be like? We're basically on the precipice of a gigantic crash again. And again, the Democrats just sleepwalking towards it. It's like they're not making the slightest effort to really do anything. So let's look actually at a couple of things that the Democrats did recently on the housing crisis, which again, if it were me, we'd be talking about the housing crisis every single day. What are the Democrats actually doing? Well, here's one. This is from February this year. Wow. White House press release, fact sheet, Biden-Harris administration announces action to save home buyers and homeowners a certain amount of money per year. Guess how much money? Well, it's on the screen. $800 per year. That's like $67 a month. I mean, would you rather save the $67 or pay it? Obviously, you'd rather save the $67. That's not a lot of money. This is when we talk about the Democrats just doing crumbs, insufficient things. There's so many people out there who consider themselves to be on the left, and then their whole theory of social change, progressive social change, is just elect better Democrats. The reality is, and I know that this may be difficult for some people, and some people may not be ready to hear this, but you can vote Democrat all day long. You can get the entire government full top to bottom with 98% Democrats, it is insufficient to actually change anything substantially. Capitalism is well past its sell-by date at this point. The fundamentally reactionary nature of everyone trying to hang on to capitalism gives them more in common with fascism than it does with socialism, because again, in the end, liberals hate socialists more than they hate fascists, because fascism, again, is capitalism in crisis. It's basically the ideological stance of imperialism, advanced monopoly capitalism, which we've been in for over a century now. And it's a process that gets rolled out more and more as the system gets on thinner and thinner ice, which it is. You've got a population which now is basically fully proletarianized, or, you know, close to it. I mean, there's still more that people could go in terms of how much wealth could get transferred, you know, how much wealth inequality could happen. Definitely after the boomers shuffle off in the next 10 to 20 years, like when they're fully gone, most of that money is going to get spent on their healthcare. They're like the last generation that has any money. That's going to get spent on their healthcare and other things, and it's not really going to get inherited that much by the Gen X or Millennial or Zoomer generations. Obviously, some will, but most of it is going to go to the 1% as the income and wealth divide continues to deepen. And this is fascism. You know, people think of the most extreme things like the wars and the genocide and the concentration camp, but the day-to-day reality of fascism is massive inequality and a police state and all of the things that are ramping up more and more and more. It's not an on-off switch, it's a process, and we're well into that. So, you know, housing crisis, you saw the chart before, is $800 a year. It's just a drop in the ocean. So that's not going to do a fucking thing. But wait, everybody, they did something else just more recently. Oh, this should really change things. Here we go, another White House press release from October. White House announces new actions on home ownership, and as usual, it amounts to like a couple of tax credits and this and that. It's not dealing with the fundamentals of what is going on. You want to actually fix this problem? Ban investment in single-family homes. Like, how about, you know, a slogan like "homes for homeowners" or something? You know, I don't know. You could workshop that, but homes for, you know, people that need them, not for investors to buy up and then hold. You know, if you go look at the housing market right now, what you're going to find is houses worth $100,000 to $200,000 being basically held for ransom at $300,000 to $400,000. That is what's everywhere. And so far, the investors and people who have bought these things up have been unwilling to put them back on the market. They're just hanging onto them, unsold, just vacant. And meanwhile, we have a homelessness crisis that is mounting. People need these houses. And again, what the few things that are announced in this just don't even remotely come close to addressing what is a full-on crisis, which again is going to fuel a mortgage-backed securities issue when these things crash. And you know, that's like a whole cascade of things, consequences that's going to come out of this. But in the meantime, people need housing. Rent is at an all-time high. And then actually, let's look at the average mortgage payment. We have a chart right here. Thanks to a user on Blue Sky from sharing this. The original source is Redfin and Department of Data, Washington Post. Average monthly mortgage payment for newly bought U.S. houses. And so this is the last decade. And you can see it went from about $800 a month to $3,000. So that's where we're at now. This is a full-on cost of living crisis. It's most acutely felt in housing, but it's really across the board. The car market is also going crazy as well. So just paralyzing prices. And what are the Democrats doing? It's just they're going to get hit so hard on this, and then it will get passed off to the other capitalist faction. Actually, so speaking of rent and things like that, here's another article. So this is from last year. There was a guy that went in front of the U.S. Senate. His name will come up in here. It's Matthew Desmond. He's a sociology professor at Princeton and also director of the Eviction Lab that's like a research team that works on evictions and the housing crisis. So he went in front last year of the U.S. Senate and told them that basically wages are not remotely keeping up with rents. Let's actually get to the figure, which is buried in here. One way to make it easier for local jurisdictions to find which properties are owned by institutional investors, which typically file under LLCs, is to require those investors to register with localities. I mean, so they're not even tracking them, let alone banning or at least putting severe curbs on this activity. But Desmond said that in 2021, it was estimated that institutional investors, some of which are publicly traded corporations, made up about 2.3% of the single-family rental market, or 340,000 single-family homes. But while that's small, he said these investors have a much larger footprint in some areas, particularly in the Sun Belt: Atlanta, Georgia; Phoenix, Arizona; Tampa and Miami in Florida; and Charlotte, North Carolina. Brunner said that in Hamilton County, that could mean 50% of the houses on a street are owned by institutional investors. So they're also not building houses. What they're doing is taking houses that are intended for somebody to buy and live in and use the house. They're converting it into a rental house and then hiking up the rent. And guess what? That's not what people want. Like, this is a massive experiment in social engineering. Most of these things I mentioned in a recent stream. I saw one of these recently where there's this big house and it said for lease. And if you had the money to afford the rent on that, you would just want to buy it. Like, that's not how people in this country think about houses. So what's happening? It's just sitting vacant, and it's sitting there and sitting there and sitting there. And finally, the interest rates have gone high enough they can make more money liquidating those properties and putting the cash into something else, another shiny object for them to chase in search of return on investment. But in the meantime, they have caused this multi-year calamity that has ruined people's lives. So anyway, going on to the level of rent here in relation to income. Yentl said that the average U.S. minimum wage worker would need to clock in 96 hours a week to afford rent on a 2-bedroom home, or work 79 hours a week to afford the rent of a 1-bedroom home at the fair market rate. NLIHC estimates that a housing wage, which is the hourly wage a full-time worker must make to afford an apartment without spending more than 30% of their income, which is what's considered, a kind of safe amount. If you're spending more than that, you're having to cut back on other stuff. It's $25.82 an hour needed for a modest 2-bedroom home. The federal minimum wage is $7.25. The city with the highest minimum wage in the country is SeaTac, Washington. Yentl said that more than 24 million people work in 5 of the lowest paying occupations: retail, food and beverage, personal care services, home health aid, building cleaning services, and food prep, because those are just the jobs that are available. And as far as the people who are like defending low wages and, minimum wage is just supposed to be like for your practice job, the reality is, well, first of all, I mean, if you're working, you should be able to afford a life. But beyond that, and not even coming close right now, not even coming close. But beyond that, most of the jobs out there they're maybe not at the minimum wage, but they're within a few dollars of it. So, that, and it may not be quite as low as $7.25, but in a lot of areas, there's tons of jobs, if you go on a Craigslist or something like that, where you're maybe just dealing with, and a state may have a higher minimum wage than that. That's federal. But most of the jobs will be like within $2 to $4 of minimum wage. So it's not really significantly different, and it does set the tone, because employers can effectively collude with each other to just keep wages low. If nobody offers higher, there's no effective competition. And again, in an environment with low unionization, where workers are not able to bargain effectively as a collective, it stays low. Absent something like, one of the things we've talked about where the local left coalitions and networks can make a difference is in cities and other localities, whether it's a statewide or whatever, that have direct voting ballot initiatives. So yes, it's electoral politics in a way, but it's not for electing a representative. It's for directly voting on something. And many places around the country have been able to raise the minimum wage that way, which usually wins by a lot, because everybody knows that they're underpaid. So anyway, finally getting to the figure we were looking for, Desmond said that even when wages increase, the relief from the burden of rental costs is only temporary. He said that since 1985, rent prices have exceeded income gains by 325%. So wages have gone up, but rental costs have gone up many times more. So he cited a study by the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia that found that, quote, landlords quickly responded to the wage bumps by increasing rents, which diluted the effect of the policy. So in other words, without rent control, increases in wages is just more money for landlords with extra steps, literally. All right, now on all of this, let's get around to a commenter that, if anybody remembers, I did back in 2020, basically 3 full years ago, around the election. Vaush, who we haven't discussed in a long time, I'll put it on the screen. God, as this goes on the screen, I'm like closing my eyes, shaking my head, and just involuntarily just face palmed. Let me see if I can just pull my head back up here. I can't like, it's hurting my eyes looking at this comment. Anyway, Vaush did a video basically quote mining a bunch of stuff, saying that Mao and Engels and Lenin would have wanted you to vote for Joe Biden. And so we did like a very long video about why that's, first of all, not true. Typically, the Marxist position has been to build up a workers' party and just use capitalist elections for advertising for workers' parties. That's really the thing that Marxists have done consistently, not to tail bourgeois parties. But anyway, so this person got mad at this very old video there. As a lifelong socialist, they said, this, quote, content, well, I mean, it is content, so you don't need to put that in quotes, is just gross. The hyperbolic purity testing. All right, you're a lifelong socialist, but you're going to unironically talk about purity testing in relation to Joe Biden. Okay. In a desperate attempt to prop up your, quote, revolution now, Vaush equals bad position. I guess some of this got cut off, sloppy screenshotting on my part, is just delusional and willfully ignorant of the consequences. What do you mean ignorant of the consequences? Biden has been in office for 3 years. We'll discuss that in a minute. If you want to irrefutably make the material conditions worse for all Americans, by all means, then you can just follow Susan Sarandon in the accelerationist clown car. How did this person even find this channel? But I guess this is now the average Vaush listener. We haven't discussed Vaush in probably like a year. I'm trying to think back when was the last time we even did a video on this, because we're through kind of the react video portion of this channel now that we've done enough of the foundational Marxist theory that we can just kind of talk about that. We're over the hanging with the sock them gang kind of videos. I know people like those. I could no longer do them. But wow. Anyway, if you want to make the conditions worse, join Susan Sarandon and do exactly what would help Drumpf. We got somebody still using Drumpf in 2023. It's almost 2024. Got some Drumpf posting going on. And anyway, they just go on. And I responded, Biden won the election. Okay, so he won. He's been in office for years now. Not only did he let the pandemic rip, but there is an across-the-board cost of living crisis, record inflation, the housing market is in a bubble larger than 2008, record low inventory, basically a complete paralysis of sales due to insane prices coupled with a homelessness crisis. We need to do better than this. It's been getting worse for decades, and it just will never get better by voting Democrat, ever. I would love it if it did. That's just not the way that this works. The Democrats, you can vote for them all day long. You can get as many of them into office as you want. It just doesn't improve the situation. It never improves it in any meaningful way that cannot just be immediately undone. And that's why I say capitalism is past its sell-by date. We must move on from this entire system. It's beyond unstable. It's wildly unstable. And if, this kind of fear-mongering about the Republicans. Like, okay, I get it. The Republicans are horrible. I don't like them either. And it's nerve-wracking living in a country that is teetering between, extreme fascism and slightly more relaxed fascism. I don't like it. I hate it. But I'm also trying to be realistic about ending the situation. And when people are ready to kind of deal with what that entails, then they can start doing the kind of extricating themselves, pulling themselves out of the existing 1% controlled political structures and start building their own that represent their working class interests, which is not the Democratic Party. It never will be. You cannot effectively organize or engage in effective ideological struggle within the Democratic Party. It just simply doesn't work. What you get is a slightly slower rate of things getting terrible. Nothing gets better ever. So when you're ready to face that, and you're calling yourself a socialist, what does that even mean in this context? You're talking about Susan Sarandon. So anyway, these people are still out there. I guess expect some of them to come out of the woodwork as we get closer into election time. All right, so that concludes our pre-programmed portion of the stream today. And let's get into the chat for the rest of the time that we have today and see what the chat has to offer about all of this. Going up to the top of the chat, I probably lost some of it. I don't know. I remember going through some of your old AI live streams about how AI would fuel the next Holocaust, and today some articles got published about how Israel has been using AI for their targeted assassinations. So there's a story from MiddleEastEye.net, and so relaxed rules about bombing non-military targets. Yeah. Your channel is big for being pretty much education and not clickbait videos about PragerU. Yeah, as I was mentioning, we kind of got past the React video portion of this and have tried to move on to some higher quality stuff because somebody's got to do it. We have to build the class consciousness, and there's a lot of people just kind of out there for themselves so that they can buy themselves sports cars and whatever, and that's why they're streaming, just doing React video after React video. We got to take this up to a higher level than just pure drama. It's a bunch of bullshit. By the way, we did another post about religion this week from a Marxist-Leninist perspective. I am going to continue making those posts from time to time as a gauge for myself of how many people are ready to be here and how many aren't. That post had a very high amount of likes, but it also had a very, very high amount of salt content in the comments of people. There was a couple of people that were like, oh, wow, I just found this channel, but you're alienating me, a communist. And I said, if you're alienated by this post, you're not a communist. Sorry if that's difficult for you to hear, but it's a fact. So anyway, we will continue to gauge the audience's actual level of communistness periodically with things like that. And the religion, to me, is one of the quickest ways to check it. Anyway. Reminder that Stockholm Syndrome is not a thing. It's a term made up by a police psychologist in 1973 to discredit a female hostage who publicly criticized the police handling of a bank heist that she was caught up in. So this is as far as the Israeli hostages when they're being transferred over to the Red Cross. They're just trying to prevent, any sympathy for the justness of the cause of the Palestinians. I suspect Trump will win, honestly. If he's the candidate, whatever, let's just put it this way. You couldn't find a much weaker candidate than Biden. The one thing these war criminals have keeping them alive, in reference to Kissinger, is the top-of-the-line medical insurance that only money can buy. Yeah, somebody was like, why do they always live to 100? I think it's because they're getting all the health care that they're preventing us from getting. Oh, is Rittenhouse broke? Kyle Rittenhouse, the fascist terrorist. I don't know which is worse, like for him going broke, or him having that pathetic managed social media campaign to try to save face in the last few years. That was one of the saddest things ever. He handed over his dignity entirely to try to become some kind of a right-wing, poster child of like the kind of fascist terrorists that they support. And, they had people running his social media, but then it was like somebody went into the likes of the account that was running it. It was liking all these like porn things. Good old-fashioned right-wing hypocrisy. Who the fuck is Cheney? Are you kidding me? Vice President under George W. Bush? COVID rapid test gave me an immediate positive back in April. I must have had a high viral load. I took precautions. Still caught it. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, they can be accurate. It's just much more likely to give you accurate results. Let me see if I have the graphic on that. I know I put it. I may not have it at hand currently. Let me see. Rapid. I have no idea what I saved this as because it's kind of old. Nope. This is one about how to swab for the rapid tests. And then there was all kinds of confusion about PCR swabbing versus this. Let's see. Actually, I do have it. So there you go. Infectiousness is the first column. Symptom onset is the second column. Then rapid antigen test sensitivity is the third column. So as you can see, the rapid antigen test sensitivity only gets to 34% by day 4 of infection, gets to 67% by day 5, 80% day 6. So it's really kind of peaking between days 6 and 8 at 80 to 82%. So yeah, it's like not really until day 5 that you have more than a 50% sensitivity on that thing. So yeah, and really only day 4 that you get double-digit sensitivity. Meanwhile, people get symptoms usually day 2 or day 3. Day 3 is usually where symptoms peak, or for the onset. And then infectiousness is actually after that. So you're most infectious after the onset of symptoms. But so there's day 2 and 3 is where the symptoms are, well, actually days 2, 3, and 4 is where you're most likely to have the symptom onset. Your infectiousness is days 2 through 10, but then the rapid antigen test, really maximum sensitivity days like 5 through 11. So if you're testing on day 3 or 4, you would probably test right away, or maybe you would test the next day. Well, guess what? You should actually, the test isn't going to be that sensitive until like 2 or 3 days later. And by that time, you've already passed your peak infectiousness. Or rather, your peak infectiousness has already begun for several days at that point. So by the time you even get the rapid antigen test result, you could have infected like 40 people. So this is kind of the problem there, and why we need to bring back the free PCR testing. So anyway, that was kind of the point there. And again, that the antigen test, it varies with the different strains. Like I think this was even before XBB. So that was like on the Omicron strains last year. And XBB is technically Omicron derived, but like the straight up Omicron strains from 2022. So, this whole thing is a moving target as the virus continues to mutate, and we're not getting up-to-date information necessarily about it. So we're kind of just operating in the dark in many ways about this. So it's really unfortunate. Yeah, I bet you were really sick. It says the positive I scored from the rapid test gave a T-line that went black within seconds. The rapid tests will give false negatives, but false positive much less likely. Yeah, so, and speaking of the faint lines, actually I have another picture there. That's a positive. Can you even see the line? It's so faint, but that was a positive. So, yeah, the rapid tests are not really the best way to go. PCR tests, much better. But again, does your insurance cover them? And if not, you're paying like $150, maybe more, dollars on that. Thoughts on the new COVID vaccine? Which new COVID vaccine? So there's a COVID surge in Europe too. There's an article here, thank you, Maria, from Denmark. Oh, so sorry, not COVID, but the pneumonia thing. So now Denmark battles surge in same type of white lung syndrome. That's what they're calling it, white lung pneumonia. Pneumonia is sparking fears in China after the Netherlands also warned of an alarming spike in cases. Danish health experts said that they were expecting this epidemic for some time. And the WHO is looking for more data from China about, quote, white lung syndrome. Danish health chiefs say rates of Mycoplasma pneumoniae, a bacterial infection for which some antibiotics are useless, has reached, quote, epidemic levels. Not great. Beijing has pointed to the same pathogen as being partly to blame for its mystery wave of pneumonia, characterized by a dangerous inflammation of the lungs, which, of course, you get some fluid there usually too, in children. In a chilling echo of the earliest days of COVID, that's exactly what I was saying, face masks and social distance. Oh, well, it's not chilling to see face masks. It just makes sense. I was saying it's chilling to see a new disease surface. But anyway, bringing back face masks and social distancing in the secretive nation. Give me a break. Hazmat suit clad workers have been videoed spraying disinfectant through schools, hallways, and outdoors. You know, what we know at this point, at least about COVID, is it's airborne. It travels through aerosol particles, and so we need ventilation, filtration, and disinfecting, including with like UV light. That's not typically practical for home, but if you go to the Davos thing where all the richest people in the world were congregating, they had all those things. They had the UV filtration and disinfecting and all that stuff. So that's what the richest people in the world do to take care of themselves. For the masses, what do? They tell you that, or they allow things to, the Bill Gates microchip thing or whatever. They allow all kinds of disinformation to spread, and, they will even run political campaigns on anti-vax things. And meanwhile, they're taking very good care of themselves because they know the truth. It's not hard to wear a mask, indeed. It is really not. And technically an N95 is a respirator, but yeah. My mother got COVID twice working at a nursing home and just had to have heart surgery. Probably not a coincidence, or at least decent odds that it is not a coincidence, because COVID does attack heart muscle. And there's been, we've covered many times, I may have it up here, that there's been a surge in heart attacks. Let's see. Oh, that's just a little cartoon that basically illustrates the same thing. But yeah, anyway, heart attacks, more common. There was that story about the 45-year-old, I want to say Kansas governor, or not governor, but mayor of some big place, I think in Kansas, that, exercised regularly, was a swimmer, biker, jogger, and had to have a pacemaker installed after COVID because their heart just got so messed up by it. Wow, the stream is really lagging. I have to say, I'm seeing that the heart comic is just going on screen now. That's got to be like a 25-second lag. I don't know why. All right, anyway. Well, I hope your mother recovers from that. My economics teacher puts the mentality best, I think. During price rises, everyone increases prices of houses. During price falls, owners would rather leave homes empty and keep prices constant or even continue rising them, for they will eventually find someone to rent high to until they can't, and the entire thing comes crashing down. Yeah, because housing is both flat out necessity. Shelter is one of your basic needs. It also, in this system, and I stress in the system because it doesn't have to be this way at all, it's the most expensive thing most people will ever purchase in their lives. Typically funded now by a 30-year loan. So, I mean, it's a huge, costly thing. To buy a house, you need entire teams of, lawyers and agents and inspectors and all kinds of stuff goes into buying a house. And the market is incredibly vulnerable to the kind of manipulation that we're seeing because it's allowed. If it was illegal, it wouldn't be happening. And it should be illegal to protect the market from exactly the kind of profiteering that's going on right now. As someone who started having seizures after having COVID a couple times, I remember when we were talking about that, Thankfully, they're finally under control now. Good. I totally agree with you. I'm just not sure how many times my brother had COVID, which is why I'm wondering about his health. But I do heavily lean toward that being the cause, or at least playing a major part in it all. Talking about Crohn's disease. So, yeah, I mean, COVID also attacks the gut. In many people, the digestive system is a major reservoir where the virus lives. People who get long COVID, they often will have like a reservoir of the virus that is not getting kicked out by the body, and it's taking up residence somewhere. In some people, it's in the brain. In some people, it's in the gut. So there's, different places that the virus can live, and that can affect how the long COVID manifests. Vienna also did the eat out to save the economy thing. Yeah, the eat out to help out. Just wow. The city handed out tax-funded coupons for Viennese hotels, restaurants, etc. Have you talked about the far-right government winning in the Netherlands? No, actually not aware of that. But thank you for bringing it up. I'll make a note of that for maybe the next stream or a community post. Far right is winning in every country. I mean, yeah, there's a far right convergence going on as capitalism prepares for another major, major crisis and probably civil unrest as well. They're about to kick people off of benefits in New Zealand. The reactionary movement in New Zealand is a great example of why you can't social democracy your way out of capitalism and fascism. We need houses around $100,000 to $150,000. Absolutely. I mean, like within the current market system, yeah, that's what a lot of them are actually worth. If you go, what their tax assessment is and like what their historic value is. And I got into a thing with a few liberals that are like, oh, what's your proof that there's a housing bubble? You look at long-term affordability metrics like income, historical value. Right now, to afford the median house, you have to be making way above the median salary. So you have to be at like the 90th percentile for income to afford the median house. That's not affordable for most people. So yeah, and now you just straight out cannot get approved for the loan. Sales manager at my work said, housing is a great investment because it always goes up. I said, what about 2008? He goes, what about it? What about it? I mean, some markets like Las Vegas in particular, there was like a 70% drop in value. I mean, yes, like housing does trend to go up in value over time. I mean, until the house just gets to the point of disrepair where, if it's not kept up, then it will go down in value because it will no longer be usable without significant repairs. But even then, it goes up in value in part as like a nod to the maintenance and work that goes into keeping it updated. But anyway, even within that overall trend, there are significant ups and downs in the cycle. Like it's very easy, actually, at times to wind up buying high and selling low. So anyway, what about 2008? It really is like people are just desperate to not remember how the system that they're trying to participate in works. And what is going to happen when in 2024, 2025, just really 15 years after the 08, 09, 2010 calamity, what is going to happen then? How are people going to explain this to themselves of like, it happened again? Yeah, it happened again. That's what the system does. And that has to be our messaging as socialists. Yes, as long as we allow capitalism to continue to exist, this is what it's going to do. And yeah, you'll get some brief periods of respite in between, but it's going to go right back to the disaster scenario before you know it. And it will do it multiple times in your lifetime, and it will get worse every time, and we will get a more fascistic government every time. Yeah, minimum wage also way behind what it should be with inflation as well. I mean, it just goes to show the sort of weak bargaining position of U.S. labor. You got to organize to bargain effectively. Like that clown in the last stream that was like, only individual rights are real. You can't do anything effectively as an individual. Strength in numbers. That's how class politics work. But, libertarianism, hell of a drug. And this is, it just people get so duped by libertarianism. It sounds so good on paper. These people are completely naive, though. They don't know how anything works. The Napoleon film by Ridley Scott sucked, but Killers of the Flower Moon was good despite the length, 3 hours and 20 minutes. I actually have not. I'm not up on either of those. I didn't know Ridley Scott made a Napoleon movie, and I don't know what Killers of the Flower Moon was. What to do if Trump gets in? I mean, same thing we should be doing now. Agitate, educate, organize. But that's the thing. People, again, just don't seem to be willing to get the message. You have to take responsibility for the situation that we're in. You cannot leave the organizing and the politics up to the Democrats. If I can get one thing across to everyone here today, it is you cannot leave politics up to the Democrats. They're owned by basically the same people as the Republicans. They're going to keep selling you out. They don't work for you. They work for the real estate developers. They work for the insurance companies. They work for big money. Yes, the Democrats get some more contributions from public employees and teachers and unions. Overall, that is dwarfed by the same industries that basically fund the Republican Party. Banking, it's basically the same. If you go to opensecrets.org, look at the top Republicans, top Democrats, and just average it out by industry. We did this in a previous stream. The top 10 are, I think there are 2 different, and some of them are in different order, but it's basically the same industries that contribute to both. They don't work for us. They never will. That's it. So if you want the situation to get better, you got to do something else. And it starts with pulling out from that party and starting to build something else. And there are local left coalitions within cities, throughout states. You got to connect with those. A lot of them are in shambles, and there will be different things like some parties don't like cooperating with other parties as much and this and that. But if we don't take responsibility for working class politics, nothing will ever get better. This is not going to get better on its own. Capitalism will get worse and worse and worse, and more unstable and less able to deliver goods and services to people. The income inequality will get worse and worse. I mean, the nightmare of the gig economy, that's just the beginning. It gets worse from here, okay? It will only get worse. So you think it's bad now, it's just getting started, and it will keep going until we change it. No one is coming. No one's going to save us. And the 1% is not going to stop on their own. I've been called an ultra, meaning ultra left, so much recently, and I have no idea what it is. I don't know what. I'd be interested to hear in what context people are calling you ultra left. But there are plenty of revisionists that. I mean, are there ultra left positions? Yes. Many of the times that people get called ultra left, though, it's by right wing deviationists, revisionists that don't like being reminded that there are actual Marxist positions to their left. There is no difference between religion and believing that walking under a ladder is bad luck. Yeah, I mean, the line between a superstition and, any other more dignified idealist belief in some immaterial force or some other thing that does not have, material evidence behind it is, well, I don't know. What is the difference? Anyone. We got a no difference? I'm inclined to throw in with that. I love the Marxist posts about religion. Keep them up. I definitely, every few months there will be one of those just to see how many people here are not ready to hear this yet. Oh, the only difference between the ladder thing and religion is no bloodsuckers are getting rich off of the ladder superstition. Not yet. But yeah, I hear you. It's more free form. It's more of like a folk belief. It was funny when Kyle Rittenhouse tried to claim he got accepted to Texas A&M. I missed that one too. I guess I've just been not following fascist grifters enough. If the U.S., as the home base of imperialism, suppresses working class movements around the world and becomes increasingly fascistic at home, then why would building working class movements in imperial core countries be preferable as opposed to simply being wreckers and saboteurs in those imperial core countries? Well, that's not like a Marxist thing in general. I don't know where you're coming from in asking that, but let me finish. Given that building revolutions in imperial core countries has historically not been done, would organized Wreckerism not help the global proletariat more? I have no idea what you mean by Wreckerism or sabotage. I mean, striking is considered kind of a form of that as far as the capitalist economy goes, but that goes hand in hand with normal Marxist, labor militancy. So I don't really get where you're coming from. So what does it mean to you to be a wrecker or saboteur versus just doing organized labor actions that shut down the economy? And also, why would you think organizing that would be any easier than organizing anything else? Oh, the Novavax COVID-19 vaccine. What do I think of it? Yeah, it's not really new. It's been around almost since the beginning. The approval for it in the U.S. has been a lot slower, though. I mean, from what I've read about it, it's at least as good and possibly better than the mRNA ones. But I mean, it's at least as good as the mRNA ones, and it's not an mRNA. So for people who are not wanting the vaccine because of like being spooked about the mRNA thing, the Novavax is a more traditional like protein-based vaccine that does not use the mRNA technique thing. So, but yeah, I've heard a lot of good things about Novavax, and that's what I've heard. There's not really as much information about it, and I don't know. I mean, the studies that have come out about it have seemed fine, so I don't know. It's a little hard to tell because it seems to be suppressed by the U.S. government as far as they delayed the approval of that as a second booster for like a really long time. My grandmother recently passed after a COVID infection. The doctors in my family didn't seem to want to attribute it to COVID. Let me put it this way. The COVID did not help her live any longer, you know? Her funeral felt almost cheapened by the religiosity of it, though I know it's what she would have wanted as a lifelong Christian. Yeah, I felt that too sometimes at funerals where it's like, can't we just remember the person and not dress it up in all this kind of, religious stuff that has nothing to do with their actual life? I can understand some of the comfort religion offers, a chance to be reunited with loved ones, etc., which makes it more infuriating how institutions have taken advantage of that human want. I mean, that's the thing. Human psychology is just really vulnerable in a lot of ways. We're emotionally very vulnerable to manipulation. There's all kinds of things humans are afraid of and that are painful for us. And, telling people stories about how you actually just keep living after death in like, a place where it's always sunny in the sky and you have all the people you ever loved around you. Yeah, it's a really nice thing. But I mean, you can believe anything that that is comforting. The question always comes back to, do you care if your beliefs are true or not? And that because it affects the decisions that you make. There were a bunch of people in the comments on that religion thing, which, first of all, let me just read it out. So people who maybe haven't seen it, as I said to that one person, if this alienates you at all, you're not a communist, because this should not be even slightly controversial for any communist. So the short post, there was a piece of, I'll put it up on the screen, there was a piece of Soviet anti-religious agitprop, and where did it go? Nope, different one. It's from my Soviet anti-religious agitprop collection. There it is. I believe the translation says something like, it's good to keep a clean house, and you can see the woman in sort of traditional garb sweeping out a guy with the Quran. So, yeah. For the religious communist, in quotes, that is to say, in parentheses, anti-Marxist-Leninist portion of the audience, gods aren't real. Okay, can we start from that note? Gods aren't real, asterisk. Because there was some dipshit in the comments that was like, proof that gods aren't real? Very funny. So our default stance is we don't accept claims of the reality of things of which there isn't evidence. Okay? So no evidence for gods means the default practical stance you take is then they're probably not real, right? Okay. So starting from the idea that there is no evidence of gods, then they're not real, okay? And we can adjust that viewpoint if there is ever, evidence for them. Gods aren't real and they shouldn't be treated as though they are. They're fictional creations of humans and never should be worshipped. If you're not ready to deal with that, you're also not ready for the real movement, which abolishes the present state of things, communism. It is the task of communists in this domain to lead the population out of, not into, superstition, ignorance, and backward beliefs. Through socialism, we can free ourselves from idealist reaction and class exploitation and replace religious and other illusions and oppression with real understanding, solidarity, and well-being here on earth in our lifetimes. That is our struggle. Pretending that the Bible, Quran, or any other collection of supernatural mythology and outdated ruling class ideology from millennia past is somehow secretly Marxist is a deception on oneself and on others. Don't do it. Tailing religion is still tailism and it's still wrong. If there's anything evidence-based in practices associated with religion, such as health or psychology benefits of meditation, communism can embrace these on a scientific basis, while rejecting the backward and superstitious mysticism that priestly hucksters try to attach onto them. The basis of our strength is dialectical materialism. And I had somebody in the comment, I couldn't believe this, but I guess I gotta just get ready for anything these days. There was somebody in the comments attacking the notion of evidence-based healthcare, or evidence-based things in the health domain. So where was this? Oh, here we go. Though I agree with this post, I still can't understand when other communists, like you, hang on to every word. Note, every word. Is that really representative of what I'm saying? Hang on to every word that the Western capitalist medical establishment puts in their so-called evidence, and they put in quotes, evidence-based studies, and then they put profit in parentheses after evidence. What? This is something I have been struggling with when the people I follow and learn from are anti-capitalist until it comes to medicine, and then they eat up everything the capitalist sells to them. Wow. So my response to this was, hate to break it to you, but science is real. Yes, science is, and that includes medicine. Yes, science is constrained by capital, but this notion that things being evidence-based is somehow a capitalist conspiracy is far from the mark. Did not get a reply. Don't really want one either. But it's amazing the things people will put online. Yeah. Let me get back to the regular screen. So yeah, is there comfort in religion? Yeah. Is it a false comfort? Yeah, as far as we know, it's completely a false comfort. So yeah. Somebody describing their cat passing away 2 days ago due to cancer, which led to really horrifying consequences. Had that cat for 13 years. We spent $3,000 to partially remove a tumor from his nose in July in order to give him a few more months to live. Well, that's very sad. Everyone loves cats, and sorry to hear that. I like the agitprop with the cosmonaut in space saying no God here. Nice. Politsturm, doubling down in anti-Palestinian rhetoric, attacking the PFLP, the Marxist-Leninist Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. I don't even know what Politsturm is doing. I think they're quadrupling down at this point. It's unfortunate. It's sad to see. I did unlink them because I want no part of that. There's an awesome artist online that does agitprop poster recreations, but with cats. Well, we are caught up with the chat right now. I don't know if people have anything else to add. I actually did want to have a back and forth with Alexa was here about that thing about people becoming wreckers rather than organizing, because I'm pretty sure that would have to be organized as well, but no response yet. Oh, that's actually a great comment. Here's a hot take on my side. Yes, dogs and cats are very cute pets, but 1, keeping pets is stealing the freedom of animals. 2, to feed a carnivorous pet, so many more other animals have to die, like pigs, cows, chickens, etc. There's also the thing about cats being one of the biggest dangers to wild bird life. Actually, coincidentally, I just had a thing that I wanted to show in the stream and forgot to do earlier. So there you go, bit of an animal rights message. I'm not a toy. I'm not a Christmas present. I'm not disposable once the holidays are over. I am a 15 to 20-year commitment. I am family. So, yeah, do not thoughtlessly give gifts of puppies and kittens to people who really realistically cannot take care of them. It's not a good thing to do. There are much bigger structural issues with the companion animal industry, whether it's puppy farms, whether it's, the issues that are being raised here, because it is true, animals would want to live with their pack or family or, that kind of thing. When they're raised for human ownership and treated like property in that way, they are ripped apart from their family. And yes, they don't have exactly the same cognition that humans do. They do have a lot of the same emotions, though. I mean, their intellect is not as developed. They're not going to write the great American novel. A lot of their emotions, though, are common to the kinds of things that we feel. They have a lot of those same brain parts. And yeah, don't give animals willy-nilly. I also am of the opinion that people should not really be breeding animals in this way. Again, it's a huge for-profit thing. In the puppy mills and stuff, there's a lot of inbreeding. They get hip problems. There's all kinds of stuff. It's a fact that cats have been kept around farms and different things for, to help with rodent control and stuff like that. And dogs have been hunting companions and things like that, traditionally going back thousands of years, because, people figured out pretty easily dogs, for example, are very food motivated. And, they figured out that they could tame wolves by kind of giving them food. And those at first, were probably kind of looser relationships, but then gradually dogs became more and more domesticated. But there's immense cruelty in the way that animals are treated. There is also the point of the other animals having to die just to feed those animals. And then, of course, outdoor cats, which I feel like if you're going to have a cat, it should be an outdoor cat. The problem is they do kill a lot of birds. So anyway, we love dogs and cats. They can be adorable. They're weird little guys. But, there's a lot of things, ethical challenges there that maybe aren't thought through all the way. There is the other point that at this point, after, thousands of years of breeding animals as companions, they're kind of our responsibility. But I guess that's just sort of a question of, winding down this practice somewhat. And, as we return more to nature, what will that look like? I don't know. But right now, there is a tremendous amount of suffering that occurs seasonally because of animals being given as holiday gifts that should not be occurring. So think through that before you do that. And if you know of somebody considering that, maybe try to talk some sense into them. Yeah, caring for abandoned animals is one thing, because again, it's like the creation even of just the modern dog or like the house cat it's a human thing. Like those species would not exist in the same form if not for human selective breeding. So they are kind of our responsibility, but that's also on us to, wind it down more humanely rather than just kind of going for profit. Why is eating other animals regarded as morally bad? It's not just morally bad in the abstract. You have to look at animal agriculture, the kind of conditions that animals raised for food are kept in. It's so bad that there's Ag-gag laws where you will literally get labeled a terrorist if you go to one of these facilities and try to document some of the conditions there. It's insanely horrific. Go and look at some of the material that's out there exposing the conditions within the animal. And I am vegetarian and have been for a long time. Did it really more for kind of the animals, or did learn along the way that it's also good for you health-wise, if you know what you're doing at least. But the conditions within the animal agriculture industry are just horrific. If you can even stand looking at documents of the conditions in them, it probably will change your mind. Oh, okay. So the commenter that no, I don't care that you spammed it. It's showing you as a likely ban evader, so it's restricting your posts, Alexa. Um, Sorry for spamming that about half a dozen times. It's fine. Not really complaining. It kept saying it wasn't getting posted, so I was confused. I didn't reply because I guess I didn't really put much thought into how it would be organized. I'll try to get back to you next week if I've put more thought into it. Yeah, I mean, well, so you're saying like a difference between wrecking, first of all, kind of isolated acts against the system is not a Marxist-Leninist tactic and never has been. It's always been organized mass activity. So that's really what we would be up for organizing. And yeah, I mean, just shutting down the economy through strikes and things like that. That's, I mean, considered sabotage by the capitalists. All right. There's a lot of discussion about people who've apparently never considered vegetarianism before. I will say there's definitely some weird narcissism in people who love specific dog breeds and spend thousands of dollars to get the one that they want. I live in the hood and it needs a trap and release program desperately. Poorer people acquire these animals, cannot afford to care for them, and then they leave them behind when they move or are evicted. Ferals are rampant, and I see them contract diseases and show up wounded occasionally. Yeah, that's common, I think, especially with cats. They'll like other cats will like chew their ears off and all kinds of bad injuries. They get into fights. Oh, I almost forgot, and then we will end the stream with this. Thank you for bringing that up, actually. And there was somebody that was asking if I could comment on Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, who also basically had like anarcho-primitivist views. Now, this channel is not friendly either to the Unabomber. Terrorism is not a Marxist-Leninist method, and nor are we friendly to anarcho-primitivists who aren't the Unabomber. But I wanted to read this comment because it was just so... The commenter kind of ended up answering their own question in the end, but I thought it was amusing the way that they got around to it. So, commenter, here you go. You are getting your wish. Somebody talking about Noam Chomsky actually outlived Kissinger. Looking for this comment. Here we go. Could you speak on Ted Kaczynski as an author some? And to be more specific than just speak on, I'd like to know, one, have you read one of his manifestos or books? Yes, not in a long time, but probably 15 years ago or so I read, maybe even longer than that. I did read the Kaczynski's manifesto. And to be more specific, oh yeah, that was that. Two, do you think his aversion to socialism makes him completely irrelevant? Yeah, pretty much. Three, do you think his actions overall, regardless of his stated anti-socialism, make him basically a crackpot half-rebel who did really well in school? I think you kind of answered your question there. I personally think his one manifesto that I read was relatable, and it's cool that he had the academic career and IQ and all that, but it doesn't change that he was going too hard in the wrong direction. So, as I recalled, the Unabomber manifesto says right in it that he could have easily, like, the content of his manifesto appears in many other books that would be published by various fairly small anarchist publishing houses, but that the reason that he did his crimes was so that he could get it more attention, basically. And if I recall correctly, the New York Times did end up publishing his manifesto. So, I mean, and it is kind of run-of-the-mill anarcho-primitivist stuff. It is also, like any anarchism, it's anti-communist, and, it talks about the over-socialized left and various other things. Kaczynski was a crackpot. He also, I understand, like, there was some problematic things about women there. But, like, he was profoundly mentally ill. Not to say that people who have some kind of mental illness can't, also make contributions to society. But, I mean, I think it came across in a lot of the way he was living was not right, and it was kind of the product of a broken mind. So I think that is what comes through for me on Kaczynski. What people may not know about Ted Kaczynski is he was a literal MKUltra victim. So when he was in college, and he went to college early because he was, real smart and skipped grades and stuff, he went, because he was younger, they kind of set him up with like therapy or counseling. Turns out that was part of the MKUltra program, and the counselor was very unethically bullying him, trying to undercut his self-esteem. So he's literally going to this person thinking that it's supposed to be helping him cope and adjust as a younger person going through college. In fact, they were trying to turn his mind into spaghetti. So he was a literal MKUltra victim. We were just talking about U.S. torture and mind control MKUltra experiments in the last stream. Well, Kaczynski was a literal MKUltra victim. So I think what you see in his life is he becomes this reclusive hermit. When I mean, can you become a reclusive hermit without being a traumatized mind control torture survivor? Yes. I think in his case, that's why he was so poorly adjusted. And I think it skews a lot of the stuff. Now, we've talked about people being radicalized based on experiences of being thrown away by society or, being really heavily discriminated against or whatever. But I think in this case, I'm not sure he had really processed that to like a healthy and constructive place. You know what I mean? I think he was still in a very kind of dark and nihilistic mindset. And I don't think he was, it was kind of half-baked. I think where he was coming from was just kind of a place of unprocessed pain rather than really thoughtful political content. And anyway, that's what I got for you there. Yeah, the Unabomber's origin story sounds like a Spider-Man villain plot. I mean, it's somewhat sympathetic because he was literally a victim of MKUltra, but yeah. So as he himself admitted in the manifesto, it's like kind of run-of-the-mill anarcho-prim anti-civ stuff, and it's just that most people don't read that unless, the New York Times is forced into publishing it. But again, as Lenin wrote many times about the Narodnik populist movement, the Narodniks thought that they were so hardcore because they did terrorism, but Lenin always rejected that as not being a Marxist sort of the masses method. Hoja actually also makes reference to that in the Palestine is for the Palestinians collection that I'll be getting to in the next couple of readings as we get through the sort of basics of Hoja on Soviet revisionism, which is important to understand in order to understand literally anything in the Palestine thing, because a lot of it is criticizing the relationship between the USSR and their designs on Palestine and also the relationship with Israel. Anyway, once we get through like a couple of things on that, reading that, I mean, he mentions like his support for different things despite, the terrorism, which again, as Marxist-Leninists, we do not accept. All right, we're going to call it there. We're caught up with the chat, and we even talked about Ted Kaczynski. So that's all we really need for a stream. Thanks again to everybody who showed up and made your contributions to this live stream, which was a very rich and nourishing. no pun intended. Okay, I'm sorry. Stream, and really a good time was had by all. We are going to see you in the next video, and that's it for now.